Sir. 72 days stranded above 3,000 meters in the Andes. No supplies, no working radio, no active search party, temperatures dropping below -30 at night, and the only way out required two starving men to walk across one of the most extreme mountain ranges on Earth with no climbing experience, no map, and no proper equipment. The question was never whether they wanted to leave. The question was whether leaving was physically possible. On October 13, 1972, Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 departed Mendoza, Argentina, bound for Santiago, Chile. The chartered Fairchild FH-227D carried 45 people. Most were members of the Old Christians Club, an amateur rugby team from Montevideo, along with friends and family traveling to see a match. They had stopped overnight in Mendoza after weather over the Andes prevented a direct crossing the day before. The next afternoon, conditions appeared to improve, and the aircraft took off for what should have been a short hop across the mountains. The route was well established. The danger was known but manageable under normal visibility. The Andes along that corridor rise above 6,000 meters. The aircraft's service ceiling was far lower, requiring pilots to navigate through mountain passes using specific waypoints. That afternoon, cloud cover obscured the peaks entirely. The crew began their descent toward Santiago too early, while still deep within the mountain range. The aircraft struck a ridge at approximately 3,500 meters. Both wings sheared off on impact. The fuselage, now an open tube, slid down a steep snow slope and came to rest in a remote, unnamed valley surrounded by peaks on all sides. 12 people died in the initial impact or from injuries sustained in the crash. The fuselage offered partial shelter, but the tail section had broken away entirely, leaving the rear of the cabin open to high-altitude wind and sub-zero temperatures. Survivors used luggage and pieces of wreckage to block the opening as best they could. Temperatures at that elevation dropped well below freezing every night. They had almost no food. Some chocolate bars, bottles of wine, and small snacks passengers had carried aboard represented the entire supply for more than 30 people. The crash site lay in an unmarked valley with no trails, no vegetation, and no visible sign of human presence in any direction. The white fuselage blended against the surrounding snow. The terrain was too high, too steep, and too remote for ground search parties to reach on foot. Survivors initially believed rescue aircraft would spot them within days. The wreckage was large. Surely someone would see it from the air. Within the first week, 5 more passengers died from injuries sustained during the crash. Internal bleeding, broken bones, and exposure compounded overnight. The remaining survivors rationed what little food they had. But at altitude and in freezing temperatures, caloric demands were enormous. Even resting burned energy the body could not replace. They attempted to fashion a working radio from the cockpit wreckage, but lacked the technical knowledge to make it function. Water came from melting snow and aluminum sheets stripped from the aircraft and placed in direct sunlight during the brief daytime warming. On October 21st, 8 days after the crash, survivors found a small transistor radio among the luggage. What they heard ended any remaining hope of external help. Chilean and Argentine authorities had officially called off the search. The aircraft was white, the mountains were white, and repeated aerial sweeps had found nothing. Flight 571 was presumed lost with no survivors. This single piece of information changed the entire equation. No one was coming. The survivors now faced a choice with no good outcome: stay at the crash site indefinitely and hope someone might eventually pass through this uninhabited high-altitude region, or attempt to walk out across terrain that challenged experienced mountaineers carrying full equipment and weeks of provisions. Then came the avalanche. On October 29th, 16 days after the initial crash, a wall of snow swept down the slope and over the fuselage during the night while survivors slept. 8 more people died, trapped inside the buried cabin. Those who survived clawed themselves out of compacted snow in complete darkness, gasping for air. Their already compromised shelter was now half buried. Their numbers were reduced further. The psychological weight of repeated loss compounded the physical deterioration. By late November, the remaining survivors had been stranded for more than 40 days. All food from the aircraft was long gone. To stay alive, they made the collective decision to consume the preserved flesh of those who had already died. The freezing temperatures at altitude had kept the remains preserved in the snow. This decision was discussed openly among the group. The alternative was starvation within days. There was no other caloric source anywhere within reach. Physically, every survivor was deteriorating. Weight loss was severe and accelerating. Frostbite affected extremities. Wounds healed slowly or not at all. At over 3,000 meters, oxygen levels were reduced, making even simple movement exhausting for malnourished bodies. Yet the only possible exit was west toward Chile, across passes that climbed higher still before any descent toward populated valleys. The group designated their strongest remaining members to attempt the crossing. Fernando Parrado and Roberto Canessa volunteered. A third man, Antonio Vizintín, initially joined them, but turned back after a few days to conserve the limited food supply for the two who would continue. Parrado and Canessa carried dried meat from the crash site and a sleeping bag improvised from aircraft insulation fabric. They had rugby shoes, no crampons, no ice axes, no ropes. Their route required climbing higher before any descent was possible. Neither man had mountaineering training or experience. They navigated by sight alone, heading generally west toward what they hoped was Chile's Central Valley. The terrain offered no trails, no markers, no reference points. Nothing but snow, exposed rock, and altitude in every direction. Temperatures at the highest points of their route dropped far below what their improvised clothing could withstand for extended periods. For roughly 10 days, Parrado and Canessa walked westward. They climbed ridges only to find more ridges beyond them. Exhaustion, altitude sickness, dehydration, and the accumulated effects of 2 months of near starvation made each hour of movement a physical crisis. They had no map and no compass. Their only navigation strategy was to keep moving downhill and westward until they found running water, then vegetation, and eventually people. Each night they survived in their makeshift sleeping bag, unsure whether the next day would bring a valley or another wall of rock and ice. On December 20th, after finally descending into a valley where vegetation appeared and the air grew warmer, they spotted a man on horseback across a swollen river. The current was too strong and the noise too loud for voice communication across the gap. The horseman threw a piece of paper and a pencil wrapped around a stone across the water. Parrado wrote a message explaining who they were and that 14 more survivors remained alive at the crash site in the mountains. Chilean authorities dispatched military helicopters immediately. On December 22 and 23, 1972, the remaining 14 survivors were evacuated from the crash site. In total, 16 of the original 45 passengers and crew survived 72 days in conditions that, by any reasonable assessment, should have killed everyone within the first week. The physical toll was severe and lasting. Survivors suffered long-term effects from prolonged malnutrition, frostbite, and high-altitude exposure. The psychological consequences persisted for decades. The decision to consume the dead became the defining element in public discussion, but the survivors themselves consistently emphasized the trek as the decisive act. Without Parrado and Canessa's crossing, rescue would never have arrived. No search was active. No authority believed anyone remained alive. What this case demonstrates is specific. When external rescue has been conclusively eliminated, and when the evidence of that elimination comes directly from the searchers themselves via radio broadcast, the decision to attempt self-rescue becomes the only remaining variable between survival and death. The trek across the Andes did not succeed because of superior physical conditioning or mountaineering skill. Neither man possessed those advantages. It succeeded because the alternative, remaining at the crash site, carried a confirmed probability of 0. Every other option had been removed, one by one, over 72 days. The crossing was not a choice between risk and safety. It was a choice between uncertain risk and certain death. 16 people survived because 2 of them walked into conditions that offered no guarantee of success, knowing that staying behind offered only a guarantee of the opposite.